Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind, and it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the executive session, where we have real conversations, unfiltered, unscripted, not concerned about bruising any egos. We keep it real on the executive session. We keep it so real that I had to channel my inner referee here today to make sure I can keep these young brothers in line. But with me, I have this esteemed panel of leaders, Dr. Aaron Bishop, Dr. Sean Foster, Dr. Gregory McCoy, and Dr. Baron Davis. So let's go ahead and jump right in it, gentlemen. During our last episode, Greg, you said something that kind of piqued my interest. We said we were going to put a pin in it and come back to it a little bit later on.
I don't remember what it was.
Well, I'm going to remind you what it was. During our conversation about high expectations, you suggested, and I had to write it down because I want you to, I know sometimes you get amnesia on me.
This is one of those times.
We had more expectations prior to desegregation. You said, I think we had more expectations prior to desegregation. And I'm expanding a little bit, Greg, to ask you that question. And then I want to expand to say, is there a sentiment by you and maybe some others that Black students were better off before Brown versus Board education? And you know, we've had some conversations with people over the years who have expressed such sentiments. And so I want to tackle that a little bit. And so, Greg, I'm going to go ahead and start with you, since you made the statement last time that you thought we had higher expectations before desegregation. Kind of tell me what are you assessing to conclude that?
Well, I don't remember the conversation, but I can tell you I don't think my thoughts have changed too much when I say that I believe that there was a time, and I didn't live in that time, so let me make sure I clear that up. I didn't live during that time, but I've experienced enough from individuals that lived during that time that have pushed and promoted and made me to believe that the expectations for many of our young Black kids in school were seemingly higher than they are now. And here's what I mean. I see more examples of how they grew up with a determination to do more. They grew up with a determination to fight for a cause, a specific cause, and that was to unite us. I can't tell you I feel that way every day when I see what's coming out. I mean, the generations that are coming up and out now are more about self. They're more about promoting things that I can't tell you I agree or disagree. I can just tell you they're different than when I grew up. I'm not saying I condone it, nor am I saying I condemn it. I just believe that the generations before us had a more specific purpose and design for what they wanted out of life.
So Greg, are you talking about the 1970s, the 60s, or the 1800s? Well, you said, what time are you referring to when you said I
Well,
didn't grow up? And believe it or
I
not,
didn't grow up in the 1800s. I
we
was
we,
being
we don't
born around the 70s. So
I
I
mean,
mean, when I say the generation before me, Sean, that would mean the
that
50s and the
would
60s, the 40s, 50s, 60s. Yes, I think when I think about you know people that are in their late 60s on up, they're living now with less because they prepared themselves accordingly for this time of life. I just don't see the same now. We're more of a spendthrift, gotta have it now, the big chains, the big cars, the big houses, you want to showboat. There's no substance to the show. There's no substance to the show.
so
So
you saying before hip hop culture, like I mean, I'm saying there's no
Uh,
substance
I'm not talking about
to the
no hip
show.
hop culture. I'm
You
not
said the
talking about a
big
hip hop.
chains, the cars. I mean, what are you talking about?
That's not just hip hop. Let me say it again, and I'll stand by this. And JR, I don't know if I said before pre-Brown versus Board of Education. I think my sentiment
you
then,
said
as it
prior to
is now,
desegregation. You said prior to desegregation is what you said.
okay, my sentiment is the same. I believe that the generations before us had a singular focus to get out and do something with themselves, as opposed to what I'm seeing every day now. I'm not saying it doesn't occur where we are trying to excel. I'm just saying I think the generations before it was more prevalent. And I could be wrong on that. I've been wrong before. So here's your opportunity to make me wrong.
Yeah, you've been
And
wrong
let me
quite a
let me
bit.
say this
Yeah,
part.
yeah.
Let me say this part too.
Yeah,
No,
you've
I
been wrong
share
quite a
different.
bit
I
over there.
share different thoughts and feelings. I do want to say this because I do remember this conversation. You and Barron and maybe Aaron Bishop, all of you ganged up on me to tell me that black men are supporting their black kids at higher rates than ever before, or something of that nature. And I said I disagreed, and Barron said, "Look it up," and I looked it up. And according to what I looked up, all of you would be correct. However, I think we need to revisit that conversation because of the way it's written. But I stand corrected.
Well. So yeah,
Brother Barron.
I don't want you to deviate off the topic too much. Yeah. So let's stay on
No,
this.
no, I'm saying I stand corrected, Brother Barron, but I think
Yeah.
we should revisit that
All
conversation. But
right.
go ahead,
All
JR.
right. But just
Go ahead
let's
with your
hold tight for a minute. We'll
post
get back on that.
desegregation.
Yeah. Let's finish on this pre-Brown versus Board of Education before desegregation. Brother Bishop, let me bring you on the conversation. What are your thoughts to Greg's assertion? And I won't put words in your mouth, Greg. You kind of said that you thought we were better off, but then again, you kind of straddling the fence.
I
I'm
said
not
I
sure what you really
believe
saying.
I believe they stood for something more than what we see today.
Well,
That's what I
let's
said.
So
Some of
so
them,
you saying
some of them, however you
we
want
don't
to.
stand for nothing now? I'm just asking. I just want before I answer the question, I just need clarity.
No,
Are you saying
hold,
today
Sean.
we don't stand for anything?
Sean. I want to let
I'll yield to Sean
Yeah,
because I want to hear his thoughts too.
Okay,
Go
all
ahead,
right,
Sean.
go, Sean. Go ahead.
I'm just trying to get some clarity. You said they stood for more. So the assumption is today we don't stand for nothing but gold
they
chains and
stood for
cars.
more together. They stood for more together. There was more unity. There was more. There was more of a singular focus because they were fighting to overcome. They were fighting to get through something. They were fighting to be treated equally. You know, so many of us now think we've arrived. I mean, you look at this lineup here. You know, I don't know for a fact, but I would like to think we're all doing fairly well. But I don't think that we are anything other than, in some cases, the exception. I don't think we're necessarily the rule.
So
That's just my thought.
we're looking at this panel here. Just on this panel, I believe we can all can identify struggles that we've had. They may be albeit different. And I believe in the last session when we had this conversation, I didn't think the expectations were lower or higher. I just think they're different because society requires a different expectation. So I just gotta disagree that
And when you say a
the
different
expect.
expectation,
Oh, you don't think the same expectations in the 50s and 60s were the same, or
what's
the
the
requirement?
expectation? Let's start with that.
What I'm saying, the
What's the
requirement.
expectation?
The requirement is different than the 50s and 60s than it is in 2025.
What's the requirement? I'm asking you.
I mean, society itself, the structure of society. There have been some things that we have been able to address, although they still exist. But I believe the challenges are different as they change with generations and or decades. It doesn't change the expectation. I just have to approach the problem the same way. So, for instance, in 2025, I'm a firm believer that I can't address 2025 issues with 1950 strategy. I just don't think that's going to yield us to be successful. I think
But
that
I'm I'm the one deviating.
we have to approach the strategy differently.
I'm the one deviating. You better get your
So,
man.
so wait a minute. Well, hold on for a
I'm
second,
so
Sean and
confused.
Greg. So, Greg, I just want to get some clarity because at one point I thought you were saying that we would be better off as a people had we not desegregated.
Oh, I
It-
never
it-
said that.
Okay, all right, okay,
Now see,
okay. Good,
boy, I
but
tell you,
that's what it
if-
sounds like when you
well, I
said.
mean, if you every time you get it clear, you get it more clear than mud. I mean,
Okay, well, be clear. Be clear what you're saying.
I've said it clearly several different ways. Baron, you go ahead because I know you want to jump in and say something. I can't make it any clearer.
I'm confused. I think what I'm hearing Greg say is that I think he may be saying we seem more unified and connected. I don't know if that is the equivalent to expectations. He's explaining he's talking about we're talking about expectations, but he's giving examples of us being more unified, having a more singular, a clearer agenda of what we're trying, what we were attempting to accomplish, and not as fragmented in the Black community as you may see today, where people have more of an individualistic kind of approach to success, where we at once upon a time had a more collective approach to success. So maybe the expectation was is a greater expectation that we were unified around causes versus today there doesn't seem to appear to be a very clear expectation that we have some sense of unity in approaching some of the challenges that we have to deal with in today's time.
Well, Baron, I appreciate that, and I'm not quite sure how you heard it, but that's closer than whatever JR. The only thing we're concerned with now and unified with is trying to get boots on the ground. If you say you don't have a boots on the ground rodeo or whatever that, I mean, they're gonna show up full force. If you say, hey, we're coming together to talk about how we can put some countermeasures in place for book bans or trying to take out Black history, you can't get 10 people to show up for that. But if you say, hey, we're doing a boots on the ground trail ride, boom, we come together. And I just have a problem with that.
So JR, let me add to the conversation now, man.
Yeah, thank you, man.
I'm not clear on his definitive position. If
Lord have mercy.
we're good or better. So I'm still believing he's waffling back and forth. But here's my position. Today I was in the company of Stuart Hamilton, who was a Black pediatrician in our community. I think he's probably been Barron's pediatrician, but most Black children who came through Columbia in the 80s, this guy was your pediatrician. And he had the sad reality that he shared with me that out of the 50 local doctors that came through the system or in the last decade or two, now there only are 2 coming through the pipeline. So when we ask the question, are we better? What does better really look like? I mean, are we growing or are we declining? Is the real question. And in what area? I believe all of us here are in the field of education. So maybe that's the scope, what we need to really look at. If we're better in education, in what way? Because I believe it's in the 1920s, which is prior. Student funding was $30 difference per student. So although we were in a position where we were all we got, we were less funded, and that's evident in data and research and in history that we were underfunded and under-resourced, right? But then we got to a position where we were put into their system in their schools. And what did Martin Luther King say? He said, I believe I have led my people into a burning building. So we were put into their system, but did we still keep or preserve that community wealth, that value of self, that understanding that we still are in position where we always got?
So it sounds like you agree with me a little bit, Bishop.
So
Tell the truth and shame the devil.
let
He getting
me
choked
just,
up.
let me just clarify a couple points. I think what Barron said is absolutely correct. In that,
Oh, his
as
is
the
clear.
community, we are more fragmented. We are less. We coalesce around a unified mission, much less. But that has nothing to do with Brown versus Board education. That has nothing to do with desegregation. That has nothing to do with high expectations. And so,
Well, what does it have to do with JR?
it has to do with the community has evolved over time. People have a greater extent of individual wealth. People don't look at things collectively as much as they did before. They look at things individually. You know, I just did a keynote address this past Saturday at the School Improvement Council, and part of what I asked was, you know, do we still believe in this whole village concept? When we say that it takes a village to raise a child, I mean, do we still believe that? Do we still believe in village? Do we still believe that we are our brother's keeper? So
Do we believe in villagers? Should be a better question.
So Greg, I mean, you kind of saying one thing, but then you're trying to walk it back and saying something else. If your point is that we aren't as unified as we were back in 1940, when we were experiencing much more oppression, I would concede that point.
We'll concede it. Let's move on to the next topic.
Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate you
We're
acknowledging
gonna kick
that.
this. Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate you acknowledging you agree.
Not with
I mean,
you.
it took you a while.
Yeah.
But I mean,
I'm not acknowledging that. I agree with you.
there's no expectation, JR. There's no expectation that we should be unified.
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind, and it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others. There's no expectation that we should be there's no expectation that we should be working for a common cause. Everyone, and I can't say everyone because that wouldn't be correct, but more and more people now are out for self. And more people that look like us are out for self.
So
And that's going to be hard for you to digest.
So Greg, I guess what does that have to do with desegregation?
I think the generations before us, they look to us to help us to get better. I don't think it's the same anymore. You know, it goes back to
What he said is we ain't had no option back then. So if I only got access to this room, then you know what? That don't mean I'm unified. That means I only got access to that particular room.
we'll kick this can another day. I'm gonna let you take your referee uniform and move on.
So Sean, did you want to add something before I go ahead and dismantle Greg's position?
Which position?
Which position
are we talking about? Yeah.
Pick one.
Yeah. So Greg, you don't have a unified position. You got 5 of them.
I'm unified and saying the same thing on every one.
You
of them,
didn't
all
say
five of them.
we. Okay. One thing we got is He's consistently inconsistent. So listen, we'll leave it at
All
that.
I'm saying is we've got to do a better job of coming together to work together to get us to a better position. Let's go with that.
Well,
Let's start with that right here. Let's start with that right here, right now.
So we're not better, is what you're saying.
I
That's
think
what it
we have a
sounds like.
ways to go. I think we have a ways to go. I honestly believe we have a ways to go. I look forward to a day when I see us doing more together, working more together, building up our young people together. I mean, it's a tough road to hoe. And each of us being in education see it every day. I don't care which school you're in. We see it every day. It's becoming increasingly more difficult.
It's becoming
It's
more
not getting.
resegregated as well.
Yeah.
So Greg, I'll share with you this. I mean, just in all seriousness, I don't know if the battle that I fight as a superintendent is against the outside society influences versus the inner unity or thought process or want of an individual group. I think the difference is there are more outside influences that I deal with. It isn't the internal things. I believe in many instances we share the same want to have a level of success, to get wealth, to gain value. I think those things that were existing then are still existing today. And if we're going to speak particularly in the Black community, I think they still exist. But I think they're substantially more outside society circumstances that we have to manage that didn't exist then. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's changed. I think you have to fight other push and pull things than they had to fight then. I think you could narrow it down to just those groups of challenges versus the other existential things
Now,
that we deal
JR,
with.
you said I was not clear. I guess you're gonna tell me that was clear. Kick this can on another day now. Let's go ahead, kick the can on another day.
But JR, I think we need to continue the conversation because we debated it, but did we discover what needs to take place, right? Like the generation before segregation, they were problem solvers. They had to literally make lemonade out of lemons every day. Okay. But now we don't have that problem to solve. And so we wind up just talking about how good the lemonade is. How do we make the lemons turn into lemonade? That way we become better.
Now I like that. Let's talk
this,
about some solutions. I like that.
yeah, what does this discover for people who are listening is something that I think you need to
I like that. So
referee
so I can tell you just right off the bat, I think having more conversations, open forums where we can get those that are in situations similar to what we've seen, where we know they need help and assistance, to come out and giving them strategies. We can't tell somebody how to be a better parent, but we can tell them there might be some other options available for them. And here's the other thing too. I remember having a conversation with someone about seeking outside help, outside professional help, and how taboo that is in our community. We've got to get over some of those thoughts and ideas too. We've got to make people comfortable understanding that it is okay to not be okay, and it is okay to seek help and assistance when you're trying to solve a problem. I think that happened more before than it does now. I was listening to a song, and I don't want to go all the way into deep thought with the song, but there was a verse in it that said, when people talked about breaking up, families would come together and they would host the family in trouble and talk about ways to keep the family together, and don't blame Mr. Charlie. Mr. Charlie is just a man. It was that song. And I was having a conversation with someone about that. And I think about the divorce rates and where we are now. Now it's easier to say, hey, I'm done with it, I'm leaving, I'm gone, and be gone. I got married. I said I want to be married until I leave this earth or she leaves this earth. And it's a struggle, but we make it happen every day. I don't think people there's an expectation in this household that we're going to stay together. We have an expectation for our kids. I can't say that they're going to follow them to the T, but we have the expectation. I think today people just wash their hands of situations and move on and think more about themselves.
So JR, if I ask him, as Greg was speaking, a situation I'm reminded of when I was an undergrad and I went to an HBCU. I had a Caucasian African American Studies professor,
Caucasian African American
and
studies professor.
true story. We walked into the class, and the first thing the teacher said was, "Well, blacks raise their children to be blue collar workers." So you can imagine the response from the class. And the next thing he said was, "So does that bother you all?" So immediately, I'm like, "Well, first of all, I felt it was disrespectful." And he says, "Well, tell me why. Why is that not the case?" And I said, "Because we don't." And he says, "Well, I got a question for you." He says, "When you were growing up, we're going back to generations. When your mom told you to do something, and you asked her why do I have to clean my room? What did your mama tell
I
you?"
said so.
And in unison,
Because
everybody
it says
said, "Because I said so." And he said, "So I want to put this into context." He said, blue collar mentality is you don't question the boss, you just do what the boss said. But when you talk about a corporate mentality, all the corporate mentality requires you to do is question the system. It's not being disrespectful. You question it to see if and how you can make it better. So then he says, and here's how that translates into future academic achievement. And so we're listening. And I'm not saying I agree 100%, but there's some validity in what he said. He says, if you ask your mom and the response you get is because I told you so, but other cultures, the mom said, "Why do I need to clean your room?" And the mom says, "Well, it needs to be tidied up because," and the kid says, "Well, what does tidy mean?" And then they explain what tidy means. And he even equated the exposure to vocabulary for African American children as a result of parents answering those questions, not that the child's being disrespectful, but because the child wanted to know, but the opportunities there to be exposed to different vocabularies and an extended vocabulary. But also for me, when I walked into this level of leadership, one thing that I had an individual challenge with was how do I effectively and feel comfortable questioning things? Because that's not a practice that I had growing up. Because, like most of us, when I asked my mom why I got to do it, she says, "Because I said so." So there was some validity in that whole thing. So when you talk about expectation, it could be considered in that regard. And just that context, when you said that, I thought about that experience that I had with a Caucasian professor and how he tied that to access to vocabulary, words, but also moving into preparing children for blue collar versus white collar jobs. Now that may not be a discussion for today, but I think there has to be, because the irony of it is when I said that, everybody said because I said so. So the same experience that I experienced, y'all may have experienced as well.
But that's a great point. But I mean, but it also could be explained culturally too, not necessarily a blue collar or corporate mindset, but just from cultural experiences. If the majority of the class is African American or Black, we have similar cultural upbringings where we've learned to be obedient to our parents, because if you spend time in church like most of us did growing up, we were told and trained that you're supposed to honor your mother and father, and you were supposed to be obedient. We weren't raised to question our parents like that. And so we've all seen or have experiences where others from other cultures might have a conversation with their parents and question their parents, but we knew we couldn't get away with that. And sometimes that was also done for safety too, for safety purposes. That when I tell you to do something, I expect you to do it because you don't know what you're going to come up against out there. So I don't need you questioning things. So I think there's definitely some the blue collar mentality versus corporate mentality. When you said that, Sean, the first thing I thought about was, well, we got a whole lot of blue collar mentality mindset system leaders right now, then, because they don't question nothing. They get directions from people that they know is wrong, and and they immediately start complying with the directive, as opposed to questioning, the purpose behind the work that what you're asking me to do. And that's something with. So if that is the case, we could definitely make an argument from being trained. I mean, I guess being exposed that way. But I had a statement that I may have shared this with y'all before too, and I don't know if this is the right word or the right way of explaining this, but we were talking about what we're going to do and why we are where we are now as it relates to how we used to be. And I've shared this kind of philosophy I had around this paradox of affluence. And for our viewers who may not have heard me share this before, when we don't have anything, we fight for everything, right? But what has happened is we have had an increase in the number of African American families and Black families who are now middle class. And so when you come out of that situation where you may not have a lot, you may be in, from a resource standpoint, you want to fight for things. You don't want things. But you trying to get everything you can and what you owe. You get to a certain point where you've accumulated some stuff, you trying to protect it now. So now when issues come up, if it don't directly impact you, you don't care. You are quiet about that issue because that don't impact me. I've accomplished some things. I'm set. I got a good job. I got to live in a good community. This ain't bothering me. It ain't, I don't care that they're not picking up the trash in the community that I came from. They pick up the trash in my community. Right. And then you got to get to a point where then you have accomplished enough, or you've attained enough that now you start to advocate again for things because now you feel like I'm on the other side of it. So there's this kind of paradox that we go through, and not all of us, some of us, don't matter where we are, no matter what our station is in life, we still fight for or advocate for positions that impact the students that we serve, or the communities in which we live in, or we don't live in, or the communities in which we come from, our churches and institutions and things like that. But there are many of us that once we get to a certain point, our whole thing is about protecting that. And I just ignore the stuff that's going on. And we see that I think the disappointing part about that, to Greg's point, was disappointing about that is we see people who are being given the responsibility for advocating and standing up for those less than, who choose not to do so. But that is one of their chief responsibilities as leaders. And they pick and choose what they want to. They want to stand up for. JR and I has had this conversation 100 times, and we have one time. The biggest thing that I take away from my experience as superintendent is I had never seen a bunch of superintendents advocate for athletics when it comes to classification, region placement. Man, we'll spend hours discussing, how far my kids got to drive, and this ain't right. But let it be an issue related to some sort of social issue.
African American studies.
All of them jokers shut up.
Nobody.
All of them shut up. They got nothing to say about. And I
book
hope
banning. Nobody.
They don't say nothing. Only a handful of us would be like, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this. The rest of them, but let it be an athletics issue.
Diversion of funds. Nobody says anything. I mean, you're right,
I think it becomes a paradox of influence. It's like, okay, I got to protect this. So I'm not going to say nothing. And we have a lot of that in our community. And again, understandably so. I'm not telling anybody to risk your family, anything that you need to, that you feel like you got to do. That's just the reality of where we are. And that leads us back to the whole idea of courageous leadership, right? Because you do have to risk some things when you're being courageous. You do put some things on the line when you are being courageous. If that's not the case, if you're not putting anything on the line, then you're not being courageous.
There was an expectation before. There was an expectation that you would do that. There's no expectation.
I'm gonna ask you a question, Baron. You mentioned something earlier. I can agree, Baron, with what you said, but you said something that raised another question that, you know, if we're asked if you question someone, then immediately in some cultures that's assumed to be lack of respect. When sometimes it's just asking a
Right.
question.
In our culture.
Yeah,
You see, and I because you mentioned earlier, it's well, if you question it, then you're being disrespectful. I'm not necessarily sure because I believe some children may ask questions out of just them
Curiosity.
being
oh no.
curious. But in the culture, in our culture, if you don't that old notion that we have, kids will be seen and not heard. I mean, I don't know if y'all, that was kind of where I grew up. So sometimes just the whole belief that just to ask a question automatically assumes a level of disrespect,
No,
and sometimes it's not that case.
I
That's
didn't
all I'm
mean
saying,
it.
and,
Yeah, I
and I
didn't mean
agree
it
with some
that.
of the
I
cultural things you
don't
said.
think I don't mean it that way. I just said we were raised that way. I didn't say that you couldn't ask a question because we all ask questions. That's why your response is because I said so. So there was a question always asked. So you do learn to ask questions. Your response was this response from your parent or the person raising you was because I said so. Well, there's
Yeah.
only a certain
And
point in which you're going to keep pushing that, because now, there's only a
exactly.
certain point because once you get past a certain point, it does become disrespectful to your parent, to
Yeah.
your person who's raising you. Because we know that we got plenty of African American kids, but they ain't got a problem questioning authority. They ask a
Right.
whole bunch of questions, and someone will flat out refuse to do what you tell them to do.
Until you answer the question. And I didn't want to say a whole lot about this because I don't want to keep going on and on. But Sean, I would have had some issues with that professor, not only making that statement but asking that question. Just
Oh,
like
we
I,
all
just
did.
like I
Oh, we
have an
all did.
issue with the responses that were provided. With your families raising you not well, families that look like us raised us to not question them, but they also expected us when we went to school to ask questions. We get stifled when we get in school by adults that sometimes look like us and sometimes don't look like us. They say, "Boy, you're asking too many questions." That's coming from the schoolhouse. The expectation that we ask questions was shut down.
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind, and it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.
There was a book called Curious George. Why was George called Curious? Because George asked a lot of questions. And I'm not calling you a monkey, but if you don't ask questions, you're not going to get any answers. So, I don't know how you'll let that pass with him saying your families are raising you to be blue collar workers. That makes no sense to me. And what's even more troubling to me is I know the school you attended because I attended that school. I don't remember no white professor asking no question like that, but I am a little older than you. So, again, the
Yeah. You
expectation,
went in
yeah,
the
well,
'60s. I went in
the
the '90s.
expectations
So
change. Thank you for proving my point again. We can move on now.
Well,
so
nobody prove your point, Greg, but I'll let you claim that if you like to. But man, I would agree that there is somewhat of a paradox of affluence, and now that people, but in our community, are experiencing a level of wealth and means and access that they've not had before, there is a reluctance to do things that risk it. And if you go back a generation before, there was not the level of wealth or means or access that existed to the preponderance of African Americans. Therefore, it was much less to risk. All right. And so when we had a situation
I think we
Man, he
lost
was
JR.
Good. Good. Somebody close us out before he comes back.
He'll be back.
Hey, there you go, JR.
Yeah.
Come on and finish up your point and close it out.
So I think that, as we've gained access and means, there's undoubtedly a more individualistic perspective. Now you can live in any neighborhood you want to. You can drive any kind of car you want to. You can run in any circles you want to. And now you have access that you did not have before. But this has been an interesting conversation. Even though my buddy Greg is a master fence straddler, I'll let him claim that his argument was proven. This has been, once again, another exciting episode of the executive session, where we have real conversations around real issues and look for real solutions. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, God bless you.
Provocative, insightful, empowering.
Kids don't have time for us to wait to get it together. They get one shot at school. Next year might be too late.
If you're a teacher, be courageous. If you're a school board member, be courageous. Because you know who the most courageous people in the school system? The children.
And are you going to stay true to who you are and what they've hired you to do?
The moment you think you have arrived and you don't need to do anything else, you are now falling behind. And it's time to pick the pace up.
The executive session is all about building leadership within you.
Regardless of whether you're an educator, you are a minister, a government official, or CEO of a corporation.
The executive session is the session for you.
Check us out and help us help you grow so that you too can help others.